What was Sean like growing up as a kid? Tell us about him.
He was gregarious. That's a word for Sean. And he was like that the second he was born. And he literally was like that through his whole life. He was he was very smart, very caring, very loving. He cared about all people. He had such a very interesting and beautiful side of him. No judgment, no judgment. My father was the same way, and it's so interesting that he and Sean literally had no judgment on people. How many people can you say that about? There's not many. So he measured people individually, and I thought that was very beautiful of him. At his celebration of life, after he passed, we had probably 1,200 people actually show up, and we knew that was probably going to happen because he had a wide circle. And the stories that you heard really told the story of Sean. And one that sticks in my mind was a friend of his, Rami Sharam, who is one of his best friends, talked about, you know, if they were going out to dinner, you had to put Sean in an Uber because he'd stop and talk to every homeless person on the way. And Rami wasn't kidding. He's like, seriously, he would sit on the curb and want to understand why. Why are you homeless? What are you doing? And he would always give them some money, whatever he had in his pocket. And his deal was, I don't care what you do with the money as long as you promise me you won't hurt anybody else. Because he used to say, I'm not going to get them to not do drugs or drink or whatever's happening with them, but I just didn't want them to hurt anybody else. So that was always my handshake deal with him. So that's really the kind of person he was. Another story there was in high school, he was the quarterback on the football team. And somebody told the story, and I don't remember who witnessed this story, but new kid comes into the school, he's kind of nerdy, has some special needs, and sitting all by himself. And some kids were, you know, bullying kind of goes on in those situations. And Sean went and sat and had lunch with him, brought a bunch of football players with him, and that kid stayed and became part of their circle. You know, I wish everybody could have a little piece of that kind of a person. He cared about his family. He was a mama's boy, for sure. I talked to him every day of his life.
So being from Philadelphia and being a high school football player, was he an Eagles fan?
He was an Eagles fan.
Well, what was his reaction when we won the Super Bowl?
I have a video of it. I can send to you.
Where was he?
He lived in South Philly. And he was with his brother and my baby sister, my niece and nephew. So there was a whole crowd of them, but they went out into the parade, of course, at night and were dancing and singing in the street. So he was very excited.
Was your son perfect?
No, he was not perfect. He was not perfect. You know, it's a double-edged sword. I will tell you that in some cases, the beauty of him, it's a double-edged sword, right? Because he would help people without any thought. He always had someone living with him. And he always had someone living with him that was in need of something, a job, a place to stay. The person that was living with him actually for only about a month before he passed away, a friend of his from 10 years ago was in prison for 10 years for drugs. Now, today you don't go to prison for 10 years for drugs anymore, but whatever this young man had done, he had been put in prison for 10 years. And Sean called me and said, Mario is getting out of prison and he needs a job and he needs a place to stay. And I'm going to have him live with me and I'm going to give him a job. And I said, you don't even know him. You don't know him. You haven't seen him in 10 years. He said, Mom, I know him and you have to trust me. And sure enough, Mario came to live with him and Sean became his, I don't know what you would call it, the guy was on probation, obviously. The probation officer comes to Sean's house, interviews him, and Mario was there and he got a job and Mario's doing very well now. But that is one example of probably hundreds of examples of who Sean was. And I say it's a double-edged sword because he scared me sometimes, because you're not afraid of this person you really haven't seen and who has not even had an iPhone. When he came out, Sean took him to the store, bought him clothes, got him an iPhone. He didn't know how to use an iPhone. He wanted to wear pants that were still falling down on him, right? And Sean said, we don't wear pants that are falling down on us anymore. And he kept saying, these pants are too tight. But, so that's some of the kinds of things, the way he was. Was he perfect? No. On the evening that he was killed, he was drinking, right? However, it doesn't mean you should die. It's not a right to kill someone,
When was the last time you spoke to your son?
On the day that he died.
Tell
I
us
spoke to
about
him literally every day of his life. And you know what? I was actually at the shore. He was up here in Philadelphia, and I spoke to him, and it was really about his company, and it was a meeting, so we were having a conference call. That's the last I talked to him. I said to him, we came to terms on this thing we were working on in his company, and that was that.
Well, take me to that day then. How did you learn what happened?
I learned what happened. It was probably a little after 11 p.m. He was killed around 10:50 p.m. And my phone rang at a little after 11. I think it was maybe almost 11:15, and it was Mike Stillwell, who was his partner at Streamline, which is a company Sean owns here in the city of Philadelphia. He does real estate development. And I missed the call, and as I'm going to dial him back, Mike's wife's name comes up on my phone, and I thought, oh my goodness, what's happened? Something's happened. They're not calling me at this hour of the night for nothing. So it was Kelly, who is a nurse, and she said, Linda, I know that you're at the shore. I need you to get in the car, and I need you to come to Philadelphia. Sean's been stabbed. I don't know anything else. I'm going to stay in touch with you. I'm communicating with the people in the ambulance. I'm trying to get them to bring them to my hospital, but I think they're taking him to Jefferson. But just get in your car. So Keith and I got in the car. I don't remember a ton about that drive. I do remember Mike then calling me back while I was in the car, and he said, Linda, Sean didn't make it. It was that fast. And I remember just shaking and calling my other son, Justin, who had been with Sean that evening 20 minutes before. So I called him and said, where are you? He said, I just got home. And I said, I need you to get in an Uber, and I need you to go to Jefferson. Sean's been stabbed. I was calling my ex-husband, Mark. I'm not sure who else I actually called. It was chaos. It was thinking, this can't be happening. This can't be happening. So he was dead in minutes.
So did you then go to the hospital?
Went to the hospital. And the hospital probably had, 15 or 20 people there waiting, friends and family, just sitting outside waiting for me to get there because I was coming from the shore. Everybody else was here local.
So what was that night like for you in the next days?
They all ran into each other. There was probably 10 straight days of one day. You go into shock, and my sisters really sort of took over. I was always the big sister, so I was always the person that took over. But in this instance, my sisters came in and really took over, because it's all about, what are we going to do? How do we manage all of this? How do we kind of try to celebrate his life, what he was here for? So I don't remember a lot of it because I didn't believe it, and I'm not sure I still do. I still have moments of thinking he's going to walk through the door and say, wasn't that funny, Mom? Come on, that was funny. You got to laugh. And I feel like he's going to walk through that door, but I know, obviously, that he's not.
So you used the word stab. So back at that time, initially, what was your understanding of what happened?
That he had been stabbed, and that's all I heard, that he had been stabbed. So my initial reaction was, get in the car, get to the hospital, it's going to be fine. People are stabbed 17 times and live. So I thought, okay, don't know what happened, don't know any of the circumstances, just hang on. And I literally sent him a text message that said, hang on my way, hang on. And it is interesting, I looked back at that text message, and that was the time of his death on the death certificate. Yeah.
So tell me about when you learned that they had charged someone or that they knew who did this. Or more facts
You know
about
what?
happened.
I want to say it was the next day. My timing isn't perfect, but I think the next day, Michael White was surrendered by a church or something like that. And he was surrendered and brought to the police station and arrested. He was charged with first-degree murder at the time by the district attorney's office. He was charged by an assistant district attorney who believed that he should be charged with first-degree murder. So that was the original charge.
And tell me about the first time the district attorney's office reached out to you.
I don't know exact timing. It was probably at least a week after Sean passed. And Larry Krasner was in the room, Lou Tomolo, who is the assistant district attorney, and Anthony Voci, who was the chief of homicide. All prosecutors. My brother-in-law, Jeff Schellenger, was there. My son, Justin Schellenger, was there. My ex-husband, Mark, was on the phone because he was in Florida. And at that time, they went through with us all of the statements, eyewitness statements of the folks that were on the street. You know, it's 10:30, it's Rittenhouse Square, it's crowded, it's a nice evening, it's summertime. Luckily for us that there were eyewitnesses there. Unfortunately, you know how that turned out, but that's another part of the story. So they read to us the statements. They told us everything that they knew at the time. And Larry said to us, we've charged first-degree murder. He said, I believe this will be disposed of at third-degree murder, and let me explain to you why, the difference between first and third. And a judge has the right to make this a third-degree murder charge. He said, as I sit in my seat, I like to charge where I think the charges are going to end. His assistant district attorney and the chief homicide believed that murder one should be held. Now, part of that is strategy. From a prosecutor standpoint, they pleaded down to third, we're done. And if Larry was true to his words and not intellectually dishonest, which is how I describe him, it would have ended up at third, but that was never his intention. I believe he had a strategy right from the beginning to reduce the charges to where they got to.
So at that meeting, there was a video, wasn't there?
There was a video.
Did you watch the video?
I did not, and I haven't seen it even through the trial. It's not the way I wanted to remember Sean. When I think of Sean, I think with a big smile. He had a fabulous smile with these big white teeth, and that's how I want to remember him, so I did not want to see that video. It's been explained to me what is on the video, though.
What happened after that meeting? Because we know the charges were eventually reduced. So
Yeah.
talk us
So
through
in that meeting, what we were told was that there would be, I'm not sure if it was an arraignment or a preliminary hearing, whichever comes first there, that we didn't even need to go. That's what Larry told us. So that struck us as odd that the family wouldn't go, but of course we went. And at that time, there was no discussion of him dropping the charges, none whatsoever. We went into the courtroom. Lou Tomolo, who was our assistant district attorney, was in the courtroom. And basically there, he just needs to show enough evidence to the judge to hold this over for court, is my understanding. So not being a lawyer, take this, you know, with a grain of salt how I'm explaining it. But my understanding was he needed to show enough evidence to say we're going to hold this over to court, and then it starts to begin the process. Larry shows up in the courtroom, which is very unusual for a DA to show up in a courtroom of anybody murdered in this city. I'm not sure if he's shown up in a courtroom for any other person. And I felt right then that something was wrong. He had a bow tie on. He was dressed to the nines, prepared. He walked right by me and walked in, had his assistant district attorney sit down. He came out, he shook my hand, he said, we're going to have bail at $900,000. Okay. I mean, 10 million wouldn't be enough, but so then all of a sudden it became very chaotic. I think they actually went back into chambers. They came out and the judge says that the parties have agreed to drop it to third-degree murder. So Larry had made a deal with the public defender's office to drop this to third-degree murder against the wishes of his chief of homicide and his assistant district attorney. And the bail was set at $150,000.
So you found out about that by it being announced in a courtroom?
Yes.
How did you feel?
Violated. We walked out of the courtroom. Larry was downstairs in the Criminal Justice Center, and my family's trying to walk me towards the door, and I said, no, I need to talk to Mr. Krasner. And I went over, I put my hand out, and I shook it, and I said, please don't use my son as a political pawn. I don't know what just happened in that courtroom.
What did he say?
I would never do that. I knew something was wrong. I literally said those words to him standing, looking face to face. Something was wrong. I didn't know what. Never been in the Criminal Justice Center, right? I've never been in the presence of a prosecutor in a courtroom. So, that's all new to me. But I knew my gut and my intention said something is wrong and this is a bad guy.